Hello everyone, and welcome to your 87th Cocoa programming tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about how we can provide our own file promises to external applications. In lesson 86, we talked about how we could accept file URLs and file promises that are image types into our application, and this is basically what the result of that was. We're going to be building off of that in this video to provide our own NSFilePromiseProviders, and this will basically be initiated when we drag an image from our application, and we'll be able to drag and drop it into Finder, for example. Basically anything that will accept an image as a file promise. All right, so that is what we have here, and basically the things that I've added so far are just some helper calls that are not really related necessarily to providing the actual using file promises. So the first thing here is really just a helper function that I actually took from the source code that I'm basing most of this off of, which is just going to take a snapshot, or not a snapshot, but it's going to find the rectangle basically that the image represents on screen, so that when we go to initiate the drag, we can pass off the rectangle that represents where we're dragging from, so it can make a smooth transition. The other thing that we want here is this call that I've added, which is going to actually convert our image into a black and white image. And this is something that we can do with file promises, and it's somewhat of the nice qualities of file promises is that basically the drag will be initiated, and only when the drag is actually trying to be accepted into the other application that wants to accept it, then we will try to fulfill the promise. And on fulfillment, we can actually do the work to then convert the image to a black and white image. We don't have to do the processing up front. So that's one of the cool things about file promises, and that's what we're going to be doing here. Is we're going to convert whatever image I have into a black and white image. Okay, so let's hop over to our image drop view, and if you didn't follow along with lesson 86, of course all of the code is always available on the GitHub page, so you can find the link in the description below if you need to do that. So the first thing we want to do is actually initiate a dragging session. And so to do this, we're going to do this in mouse down. So I have this sort of pre-made mouse down method that I have here. And it's pretty simple. Basically, if we have an image, we're going to begin an event tracking loop, which we talked about in a previous tutorial. And we're basically just looking for a mouse up or a mouse dragged event. And on either of those cases, then we're going to do something. So that's what's going to be called with the handler, is when either one of these events occurs. And if either one of them occur, we're going to stop this window tracking loop. And what we want to do is, if there is a mouse dragged event, then we want to begin a dragging session. And in this case, we are going to create an NS dragging item. And this is always what you do when you're creating a drag event or a dragging session. So you create an NS dragging item. It needs to be some kind of object that conforms to pasteboard writing, and this is going to be our NSFilePromiseProvider. And the person that's going to actually provide this for us is our view controller. And so there's a delegate call that we're going to have to add here in a little bit to actually fulfill that for us, but we'll do that in just a bit. The next step is to, once we get this dragging item and the file promise with it, we're going to get the dragging frame that's going to represent where the drag is starting from. So we're going to set the dragging frame on our dragging item here. And then we're also going to assign the contents of the image, because this is again going to be that sort of temporary thing that we drag around to other sources. And once we've done that, then we just say begin dragging session. This is how we actually initiate a drag in Cocoa. And we pass in the dragging item that we have, the event, which is just, the event that we're getting from our mouse down, or our dragging loop basically. And then the source is going to be a delegate, which we still need to implement. And this is going to define how our mouse pointer basically will look when we drag it around. There's some other calls that we can do as well, but that's a required one. And so we need to actually conform to NS dragging source. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'll go ahead and add an extension here on our image drop view. And this is going to be NS dragging source. And the one method that we need to implement for this is dragging session. Which one do I want here? dragging session, this guy here. So dragging session source operation mask 4. This is the only actually required method that we need to implement on NSDragging source, which we can see if I jump in here. This is the required one. And so this one's pretty simple. We just need to tell whether we're going to be inside or outside the application. So here I'm just going to say if context is outside application, then we'll initiate a copy. If it's not, then we shouldn't really have any symbols attached with it at all. So that's essentially what we have here is we've implemented that. So that should fulfill this guy here who's looking for an NSDragging source delegate. And then we also need to implement this as well. So let me go ahead and copy some of this. So we're going to make a new delegate function. We're going to call it PasteboardWriter for image drop view, image drop view, image drop view, and that should be it. And then from here, we're going to return NSPasteboardWriting, some object basically that conforms to NSPasteboardWriting that we will then put inside of our NSDragging item. Okay, so now that we've done that, we actually have to implement this PasteboardWriting delegate, right? So we need to actually vend some kind of object. And in this case, we need to vend an NSFilePromiseProvider. So our view controller is who is the delegate in this case. We already have implemented this image drop view delegate thing here. So let's go ahead and finish that off with implementing that other method we just added. So in here, we want to basically pass on this NSFilePromiseProvider. So let's go ahead and make the provider NSFilePromiseProvider. And to construct this, we're going to define what kind of file type it is. So we're going to say KUT type, and we're going to vend a JPEG, I think is what I agreed to in this video. The delegate is going to be our self, and that should be that. And then I think I need to just convert this to a string. Okay, so on the provider, now we also want to set some user info on here. So the user info is going to be our image that we want to convert, and we're getting that from our image drop view. And then we simply return the provider like so. All right, and of course we're missing this delegate implementation here for NSFilePromiseProvider delegate. So let's go ahead and we'll add an extension for our view controller to be NSFilePromiseProvider delegate. And now that should fix that property there. So now we conform to the delegate that it wants us to conform to, and we still need to implement that. Okay, so to recap what we've done so far, right, we have our mouse down, we begin a dragging session. The dragging session is going to ask our view controller through this delegate call for something that conforms to NSPasteboardWriting, which an NSFilePromiseProvider does conform to. And then we create an NSFilePromiseProvider. The last steps that we need to do here are actually do the work to convert the image. So we've assigned this delegate. We actually need to implement this guy here now. So let's go ahead and add in the stubs that we need. So the first stub that's added is basically giving us the file name that we want to deposit in the location. And so you can do whatever you want for this. If you want to take, the image name that you already have and tack something on, that's up to you. I'm just going to do something simple where I call it this, and that's good enough. The other thing that I actually want to do with this is I want to have a work queue that we do the operations on. So we actually already had a work queue previously that we created. Where did we create that? So here we created this work queue, and this just allows us to do the processing on the background. So instead of having this do work on whatever queue it would work on, I assume that work would actually be done on the main queue, but not 100% sure. But either way, we can provide our own operation queue that we want to do the processing on, right? So when there's a drop that occurs, the file promise is going to come back to us and ask us, okay, write your information to the URL. And that's what this delegate callback is for, is to actually do the work to write whatever we need to the following URL. And then when we're done, we call the completion handler, and that's it. So to finish this off, we're going to make a little do, try, catch block thingy here. And I'll show you why in just a bit. So let's go ahead and grab our image. And the image is going to be your user info, right? So we're actually just pulling this from the user info that we passed along here. That's just so that we know that if there was different drags that occurred, right, we're passing the relevant information in this user info param so that when we go to perform this dragging operation, we actually can pull out the proper data that we're trying to convert. All right, so if there's an image, we want to try and write the black and white image to the URL. The URL is what's provided here. And if there is no image, then we're actually just going to throw an error. I have this little image error enum that I created here. So if there's an error, we'll just throw an error. And this just allows us to catch it all in one place. So image error dot invalid image. And of course, we want to be able to, so if this actually goes through, so if this is successful, then we will call the completion handler with nil. And nil indicates that there is no error, right? The completion handler looks like this, where you can pass a nullable error. So nil indicates that the operation was successful. If it was not successful, we need to catch the errors that we had, either coming from the black and white conversion or from this error that would occur if we had no image at all. And this is just a general catch-all where we can just pass error. And this is a sort of Swiftism where in the catch block, if you don't specify your own error, you actually have a sort of shadow variable thing here that is defined as error. And that's just whatever error is thrown as a response to any of these tries or throws here. All right, so that should be everything that we need to do. So we can go ahead and try this out to make sure we did it right. So let's go back to Finder here. We'll first drag the image from the Finder into our application. And now I'm going to drag out from the application. We can see within the application, my mouse just looks like a normal mouse. When I leave the application, it turns into a plus sign, which is that copy indicator. So when we were working with NS dragging source and we indicate copy, that's what happens when we indicate copy. We get this little plus sign. And when we drag it out, we get a little black and white image. You can see that the image was converted into black and white there. All right, so that's everything that we had for using NSFilePromiseProviders. Again, just to kind of recap all the steps that we did, we first initiate a dragging session by calling begin dragging session. You pass in some kind of NS dragging item for that, and this doesn't have to be a file promise provider, but in this case, that's what we used. So we had this delegate call that we return our NS file promise provider, basically anything conforming to NS pasteboard writing, which this does. And then we have to set up the delegate for this particular file promise provider. And when the drop is actually initiated, we will get this callback to specify the name of the image that we want to drop, the queue that we want to perform the work on, and then an actual callback to perform the work where we write out the final result to the URL provided to us. That's it. So hopefully this helps you guys understand how you can write your own file promises in your own applications. This is an excellent way to provide file promises if you have some work that you need to perform on something and you don't want to do that work up front. The file promise provider is the way to go for that. All right, I'll see you guys in another video. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. Ways to contribute and additional information are in the description. I'll see you next week.